What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Boom Boom Performance Podcast. Today's guest is somebody who I've been following for quite some time now. I'm super fired up to have on the show. Man, we've been having a lot of great guests, and this one does not fall short from the great list. Today's guest is the White Rhino himself, Mr. Stan Efferding. Stan Efferding is known to be the strongest bodybuilder ever. Like, that's literally one of his nicknames, along with the White Rhino. But Stan Efferding is a power lifter. He is a bodybuilder. He is somebody who has over 30 years of coaching experience, and he is the founder and the creator of multiple things, including the Kooler and different stuff. But mainly what we're going to talk about today is the vertical diet, what he is the founder of, the vertical diet and peak performance. And he is known by this diet because it has caused some controversies because he's so invested in micronutrients in an industry that is so consumed with macronutrients. So he really breaks down the what, why, and how of the vertical diet, why it's so important for us to prioritize health first. And once we do that, we can go vertical with our macros and with our performance and with all these other measurements. And he actually dives into specific detail of how he is helping the world's strongest man, professional CrossFitters, bodybuilders, bikini athletes, power lifters, everyday mom and dads. I mean, literally thousands and thousands of people around the world using this diet protocol. And he's getting them fantastic results. But not only fantastic results, performance and aesthetically, but also with their blood tests, with their hormones, with their health, with how they feel, with their digestion. So we go deep into a wide variety of topics, all things vertical diet, of course, but I mean, we talk digestion, we talk sodium intake, we talk caffeine, we talk micronutrients, we talk how to set up the vertical diet, we talk about his specific athletes, we talk about so many things. You guys are going to learn so much from this podcast. I really, really suggest you stop, take out a notepad, and get ready to take notes because there's so much knowledge in this episode. Before we get into this episode, I do have a couple quick announcements. As always, guys, if you enjoy this podcast and if you are a fan of Stan Efferding, what I need you to do is take a screenshot right now of the podcast you're listening to, post it on your social media, Facebook or Instagram, specifically your Instagram story, tag myself at Cody.boomboom and tag at Stan Efferding so we can see who's listening to the podcast. Let us know what you like about it. We want to hear from you. The second thing, guys, this podcast is brought to you by the Boom Boom Elite. The Boom Boom Elite is the membership site of Boom Boom Performance. This is where we drop our latest, greatest, and most advanced training programs for you to get the best results on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. So if you are in need of training programs, whether you are a coach looking to help your clients or you are a client looking to better your body, this is the place for you. You can visit boomboomperformance.com/elite or click the link in the description below. Now, without any further ado, let's get on to this amazing podcast with the White Rhino, Mr. Stan Efferding. All right, Stan Efferding, man, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I agree with so many of your philosophies, as I mentioned, and I did not realize that you lived in my hometown of Tacoma, which is a surprise because Tacoma is a small place on the map. So it's cool to see somebody from this area. Before we get into everything vertical, can you just give the listeners who you are in a nutshell, kind of your story of how you got into fitness in general?
Yeah, I was just a little kid, 135, 140 pounds when I got to college. I was trying to play collegiate soccer. I was recruited I got a scholarship. Coach told me I was too small, and so I started lifting weights, and I just fell in love with it like a lot of people, and started trying to learn everything I could about it. Started studying exercise science at the University of Oregon. And just, it's been a lifetime passion for me. It wasn't until more recently when the internet became such a big influence in the market that I was able to make this my living. Previously, I had always kept my day job because bodybuilding and powerlifting don't pay the bills. And nowadays, I've had an opportunity to work with some great coaches and great athletes, and now produce a program that allows me to work with hundreds and now thousands of people all over the world. And so I just love it. I'm finally doing something that I enjoy, and I feel like it's benefiting a lot of people. The information is things that I've learned over all these many decades of coaching and training and competing. And so now I'm just trying to fine tune and perfect as much as you can with as many variables as there are with clients. A program that I think helps people reach either their health goals or their performance goals.
It's really hard, you probably get this, for me to picture you at 135 pounds. You're obviously a very large dude now. Was there a point where you fell into the gimmicks or the fads or struggled with weight gain at all to build muscle, or were you kind of not necessarily genetically elite, but somebody who just naturally kind of put on weight?
No, my pops is 5'10", 160 pounds. So it was hard for me. It took me 2 years to compete at almost 3 years to compete at 158 pounds in bodybuilding. I had trained almost 3 years to compete at 158 pounds. And gaining weight has always been, and still is, holding on to weight, very challenging for me. So I learned a lot of things along the way, made a ton of mistakes. I did the dirty bulks and paid the price for that numerous times. And I figured out how to work the macros to my advantage as an ectomorph. And that isn't always consistent with the way I manage, mesomorphs or endomorphs. But I've just found that food was the defining factor, that you don't grow in the gym, and lifting weights doesn't build muscle, it just breaks it down. And I had to be really disciplined about eating, both to gain weight and strength and size, and then to lose body fat without losing muscle. It was a very precarious for me, and in particular because I always had a very difficult time with digestion issues. And I struggled with that for many, many, many years, if not decades, before I started to figure out how to refine my diet so that I had good digestion. And I use those tips and tricks and tools now. They're actually not really tricks at all. It's very common sense stuff with my athletes, and with great success. So just what I've learned, both myself practically and from coaches throughout the years, and from athletes that I've tried my methods on, I think I've got a pretty good system in place now. It's been a long time coming.
There's a few things I want to pick apart with that, but I think we're going to get into that as we kind of unravel what the vertical diet is. So before we do that, can you tell us how the vertical diet even started? How did you decide to create this program, this plan? It's much more than a diet. It's not like a meal plan. There's so many aspects of it. So I want to get into it all, but I'm curious of how it all started in the beginning. What made you decide to go this route?
Yeah, the product, the vertical diet and peak performance, you're right. It does include many aspects of performance and health, because it is a bit of an orchestra. There's nothing happens to the exclusion of everything else. And that includes sleep, hydration, nutrition, and training. And so the program that I have been using with my athletes for many, many years, and kind of refined for myself, is very inclusive, very comprehensive, such that it's not just a diet. Because I don't think just a diet works for anyone. If your sleep's not on point, who cares about your diet? It's not going to matter. You're going to have performance problems. And if your hydration's poor, or if your digestion's poor, or if your training is inadequate, or is inappropriate for your goals, be it hypertrophy or strength, which can be very different things, or performance, say with CrossFit athletes, etc. So it is very comprehensive. Vertical diet and peak performance is what I called it. I've been using that for years. It's something that every time I got a client, I would give them everything I had to help them be successful. And every question they asked me that I answered for them, I would incorporate into the diet program if I thought it had relevance to other clients. And so I just kept updating it over the years that I'd worked with people, and refined it as I found it to be effective for myself and my clients. And then finally, after working with Hafthor for about 2 years, he obviously had some huge success winning the world's strongest man, Europe's strongest man, the Arnold. And it was after that a lot of people, historically, I had just worked with clients personally and used my vertical diet program with them. And it was after Hafthor really, I think, had become so successful, and the diet, people started asking me about what I was doing for him. And that's when I put it on the market as a product, the vertical diet and peak performance. And that was just March of this year. So it's relatively new in that respect, but it went viral, and many hundreds of athletes, and now thousands and thousands. I probably have over 40,000 downloads worldwide on the the Vertical Diet and Peak Performance program. I didn't lock it down, so it's been shared many, many times. Coaches would buy it and then use it with all their clients. And some of that was I think intentional on my part, because I wanted as many people as possible to be able to use the program. And then I refined it with the Vertical Diet 2.0, and now I'll be releasing the Vertical Diet 3.0 January 1st. That will include a whole bunch of additional details with respect to how specifically things I did for Hafthor, things I did for Camille LeBlanc and Ben Smith and Becca Voigt, the CrossFitters, and things I do for professional MMA athletes. And all of the feedback that I've gotten from dad bods and soccer moms throughout the world in terms of things like lowering blood pressure, fixing high blood sugar problems. We've even had vertical babies now, people who had low testosterone or low sperm counts, who would utilize many of the aspects of the diet, which are simpler than one might think. It's just a matter of being disciplined. And we're able to then conceive. And we've actually just had our third contacted me this week that we're able to conceive after a couple of years of trying and even with medical care, just because of increasing sperm count. So it's been exciting. I've had a lot of different, positive aspects, lowering cholesterol, a whole host of obviously losing body weight. We've now had many clients lose over 100 pounds on the diet. So that's what it is. It's kind of a culmination of everything's, when you work with a client, it's a bit of a collaboration. You learn from them, you teach them certainly, but you also come together and have a meeting of the minds and figure out what works for them. And every time something works for someone, I include it in the diet program as part of, information that other people may benefit from.
I love it, man. It's ironic that I didn't realize you started it. It wasn't that long ago that this actually started really growing. And it's ironic that it's called the Vertical Diet and literally everything just went vertical, went straight up and blew up so quick. Can you get into the details behind, like, what are the philosophies, as much as you can obviously share? It sounds like you're pretty big on sharing. And I've even watched, you have an hour-long seminar on the Vertical Diet for free on YouTube that I highly recommend people go watch, and I'll link in the description. Can you kind of give us the ins and outs of what the principles are behind the Vertical Diet and why this is working so well?
Yeah, I think the way the name came about is because I said you can't put a 3-bedroom house on a 2-bedroom foundation. And so I built a foundation of micronutrients. I know that the push is now to give people their macros. And I found that to be somewhat oversimplistic. And you can get your macros in, but still be nutrient deficient. And so I would find that clients through blood tests, that's one of the key components of the diet is that I had blood tests done about on a monthly basis for the last 10 years throughout my competitive career. And I was able to see when nutrient deficiencies propped up. When I dirty bulked, I could see insulin resistance. When I was vitamin D deficient and I remedied that problem, I could see many things improve. And so I do blood tests with my athletes and I recommend them for people. And I use the results from those to shore up deficiencies. And so that's kind of how I drew in the foundation. I pulled from the foods that I felt were the easiest to digest and provided the most highly bioavailable micronutrients. And by that, I simply mean vitamins and minerals that you can easily digest. For instance, heme iron in red meat. And it's not nearly as readily available in vegetables, and certainly not, or in chicken, or certainly not vegetables. And B12 would be another example of something. And the reason why I recommend red meat is because of the zinc and the iron and the B12 in particular, and what I found to be a deficiency in bodybuilders in particular, women in particular, dieting for shows. These were people who you would think, would be very healthy, doing their cardio and exercising, and they're on a, they're losing weight, etc. But I found that they were heavily exposed to nutrient deficiencies. And so they were demonizing red meat. They were demonizing dairy. They were demonizing fruit. They were demonizing salt. There were so many things that I found were creating these deficiencies. Demonizing eggs, demonizing cheese. All of those things, I think, are 100% necessary in diets. And so I've worked with many, many IFBB Pro bikini girls, probably been training female athletes since the late 80s, early 90s. And they're the ones that seem to be the most nutrient deficient because they're the most restricted. They eat egg whites, white fish, and broccoli. And I found that they suffered as a result from that. They had metabolic adaptation to a very serious degree, And they ended up having serious micronutrient deficiencies, causing their hair to fall out and their nails to get brittle. And that would happen as part of dieting for a show that was supposed to be the pinnacle of health for them. And so it was with them that I was first able to intervene and get great results. Men tend to overeat, and so they tend to manifest nutrient deficiencies much more slowly, if at all, whereas women get exposed to them very quickly and end up being of poor health. And so my diet includes dairy, and it includes fruit, and it includes salt, and it includes red meat. All of those things that I think contribute to a healthier individual, and then their performance improves, their energy level, their body composition, their ability to build muscle mass and lose body fat. And so I train many women who now won't be as restrictive and won't do too much cardio to try and torture themselves into achieving a certain condition. And then with the men, I found that the guys I trained, especially the heavy ones, the Hafthors of the world, they would end up succumbing to metabolic syndrome. They would eat too much of the wrong foods and end up getting fatty liver and high hemoglobin A1C, high blood sugars. And so in many cases, I would have to go in and try and fix those problems. And one of the ways I do that is by avoiding, first and foremost, vegetable oils and wheat. It seems that bread seems to be a huge problem for these athletes. And I noticed it with myself, bloating and gas. And so there are foods I avoid, not food groups. I don't eliminate entire macro groups like you would in a keto or a carnivore diet. But I am selective about what type of vegetable that I feed my athletes and what type of dairy. Maybe they're intolerant to lactose or whey or whey allergies or casein. And so I'll have them do a yogurt, a Greek yogurt. I certainly include cheese because of the benefits of the vitamin K2 and egg yolks, because for the same reason, and biotin and choline for blood sugars. So I don't know if I'm saying too much at once, but generally speaking, I build that foundation of micronutrients, and then the vertical aspect of the program is if I want to fuel athletes for performance and they need more calories, I have to be careful what kind of calories I give them. I want to make sure they get a huge return on their investment. I can't pump them full of bread, and I can't pump them full of brown rice or broccoli or pasta or pizza or pancakes or any of those things, because it'll create that metabolic damage, the what we call metabolic syndrome, the high blood sugars, and they'll end up gaining more fat than muscle. They'll have horrible digestion problems. Most of the big athletes I work with, like myself when I was powerlifting, end up with diarrhea and gas and bloating constantly. And even the 120-pound IFBB Pro bikini girls, historically, when they were eating tons and tons of broccoli, would end up with constipation and all kinds of digestion issues and gas and bloating and mineral deficiencies as a result. A lot of those cruciferous vegetables with the lectins and the anti-nutrients can bind to valuable minerals and electrolytes like sodium and potassium and magnesium and create deficiencies for them. So it works on both ends of the spectrum in terms of the body's the same, whether you're a female dieting for competition or you're a male bulking for powerlifting or something like that. I think that the fundamentals, the physiology of the body is the same, and the things you have to look out for are the same, and the nutrients that your body needs to perform optimally are the same. And so I include those in everyone's diet, just in varying amounts.
One question I would have for you based on that is, and I think this is because of my assumption that people have an argument against it, do you find that when you're training guys to get bigger and stronger, they need less calories because their nutrient partitioning is better, because the food that they're consuming is better, because they have less issues? Or do you just find that they kind of break that gap of not being able to, or should I say, being able to get enough calories in? Because a lot of people turn to dirty bulks because it's so hard to consume enough calories with If It Fits Your Macros crowd hates the word clean, but clean foods. How do you navigate around that? And do you find that people can gain muscle on less calories when they're following this approach?
I'm a huge proponent of the calorie equation, first and foremost. I believe it for deficits in terms of losing weight, and I believe it for surpluses in terms of gaining weight. Second to that is quality. food quality. And you hit the nail on the head that you aren't what you eat, you're what you digest and absorb. And in some cases, when you overeat foods that your body can't readily use, or it's having problems digesting, lactose intolerances, you name it, it will push those nutrients through your body much quicker. And that's why you end up with diarrhea. And you won't absorb as many of those calories. So yes, I do believe that, and have seen, that my athletes are able to eat fewer total calories and still make gains. Having said that, I've also found that by eating these foods, they're hungrier and can eat more. So it benefits them in both aspects. It was one of the first things that Thor and Shaw said to me. One, they were regular, which is the first time that's happened for them in years. And two, they were hungry. And that's a very rare occurrence, because anytime you look at videos of people trying to stuff down 10,000 calories a day, it's exhausting. And that's because they're eating pizza, pasta, pancakes, as opposed to eating, I put in ground beef or ground bison or ground steak for people who are trying to gain weight, because it's got more surface area, it's a little easier to digest. And then lots of white rice. And then the vegetables that I give them are low gas vegetables. Spinach in particular is a much easier vegetable to get your potassium and magnesium from without the burden of all of the anti-nutrients and the gas and bloating, such as broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus. Those really tend to gas you up. I take bread out just mainly because of the gas issue. It's difficult to digest a lot of that. And not that I think everybody has celiac disease, or that wheat is necessarily bad if it's whole grains. But having said that, it's certainly not optimal in terms of a driver of calories. And I can get those micronutrients from somewhere else that wreak less havoc on the body. I include some fruit in there, and you may have heard from my videos before, and this tends to create some consternation in the industry, very specifically for fructose, which, as you know, has been demonized, because fructose does increase metabolism. It increases body temperature, it stimulates the liver, which then is more efficient for processing thyroid. 80% of thyroid is converted from T4 to T3 in the liver, in a healthy liver. And as you know, when people start gaining weight, one of the problems with metabolic syndrome is potentially liver damage, elevation of AST, ALT in the bloodstream, or in the blood tests. And that comes from training as well. That comes from performance-enhancing drugs as well. It's one of the lessons that I learned from my blood tests and from things using oral performance-enhancing drugs like Dianabol or Anadrol. It wreaks havoc on the liver. It's toxic to the liver. And so the liver shuts down your appetite immediately. And that's one of the problems that I had working with a lot of top-level strength athletes, is they experience the same problem. So how do you remedy that problem? You work on getting the liver healthy. Milk thistle doesn't do that. Gallons of water doesn't do that. Your liver is the detoxifier. It just needs to be given the tools that it needs to do the job. And so I found that fruit did that. Taking in a few ounces of fruit or fruit juice a few times a day lowered AST, ALT, increased metabolism, increased body temperature. I found that with women who were dieting for physique and figure and bikini shows. One of the first things that happens to them when they restrict calories and start doing all that cardio is their metabolism slows down and their body temperature lowers. That's part of metabolic adaptation, as we know. And, you would think that body temperature would be 98.6, but really it's around 97.8 to 98.4, kind of right in that range. And when I have women who are competing measure their body temperature in the morning, thermometer under their armpit for about 10 minutes is really kind of the most accurate measurement I can get. They're usually under 97.8, 97.6, 97.5. That's a problem, because now your BMR, which is responsible for 60 to 70% of your calorie consumption in a day, is lowered. Your metabolism slowed. You're burning fewer calories at rest. And so one of the ways that I remedy that, there's a host of different ways in the diet program that I remedy that, but one is I put fruit in their diet, and they'll eat half an orange 3 times a day. They titrate it almost like medication, like medicine. And fruit stimulates the metabolism. It raises the body temperature. And we know this because people who are getting surgeries, when they're put under, when they have to be brought back from surgery, the if their body temperature is too low, they'll infuse fructose into the patient to raise their body temperature so that they can, before they can be brought back out of sleep. And so there's plenty of literature that supports that. The liver can handle 75 to 100 grams of fructose a day very easily. I recommend around 50. Some bigger athletes, I might go 75. And I get that with probably 3 12-gram doses of, which is about 4 ounces of orange juice or half an orange 3 times a day. So it's strategic. There's a host of other things that I do for both men and women to improve body temperature and improve metabolism. One is salt. I just have them salt all their meals. It's incredible for metabolism. It's also great for digestion, sodium chloride, hydrochloric acid. It's great for energy and stamina and endurance and recovery. Iodine. Iodine is critical for the thyroid. Try iodothyronine. Iodine is part of T4 and T3. So I make sure my athletes get adequate iodine in their diet. That's why I include cranberry juice as a source of iodine in my diet. If they can't access that, then I'm recommending an adequate amount of iodized salt. And for some people, they might even have to go higher, like iodoral, which is a 12.5 milligram dose of iodine that some people may benefit from, which is also great for the immune system. It's extraordinary for the immune system. Iodine reduces breast cancers, gets toxins out of the body, such as chlorine and fluoride and bromine, and bromides are in bread. So, we're poisoning ourselves with the chlorine in the water we drink and the fluoride. And then iodine helps shuttle that out of the system. It helps displace it into the bloodstream so it can be processed out of the system because it binds to iodine receptors. So that's a huge one. Potassium is another one. Along with sodium, I try and make sure that they get 4,700 milligrams of potassium a day, which is hard to do. You have to be very deliberate about getting 4,700 milligrams of potassium. There's maybe 1,500 milligrams in 2 cups of spinach. There's 400 or 500 milligrams in the juice that I recommend daily. There's 900 to 1,000 milligrams in a potato that I recommend daily. You can get some in the yogurt that I recommend. There's actually 100 milligrams of potassium per ounce of beef. The reason I recommend the beef in the diet. So you have to cobble together a host of different sources to get your 4,700 milligrams. It's difficult to do. You have to be deliberate. But it's huge for blood sugars as well, and for energy and for cramping, for heart rate regulation. Potassium is a monster for all those many things. It binds to glucose to form glycogen, and so it definitely helps with blood sugars. So I think calcium as well is critical for the metabolism, and that's why I have the vitamin D3 in there, because it dramatically improves calcium absorption, and that's why I have some sort of dairy source. If you can't tolerate milk, I go to a full-fat Greek yogurt. If you can't tolerate that, then we work more specifically with cheese. A hard-aged cheese like cheddar is nearly lactose-free. So I don't know if I'm getting off track too much, but there's a host of things that I think work in concert, and it's hard to talk about any of them individually because I think they all need to be utilized together, and they should be obtained for the most part from food, but for vitamin D3, which is really a hormone. It's a steroid that is synthesized from the sun in the skin, and so it's very hard to get that from food. So that kind of a summary of most of the foods. Bone broth I put in there for digestion and for collagen, which is important as part of the process to create antioxidants in the body. So, all of the food I think has a very specific purpose, and it all works together. The daily carrot I mentioned about that people know I put about 2 or 3 little baby carrots in at least 2 meals a day. And that's just strictly for fiber, raw, but it's a root tuber. So it's fiber that doesn't cause a bunch of digestion problems. The problem with fiber is it's a double-edged sword. People start taking it and they end up constipated or with massive amounts of bloating, and it swells the intestines. It binds to minerals and electrolytes. It impairs protein absorption. So you have to be cautious about how much protein you use and what type or fiber you use and what type, but it is essential for shuttling toxins out of the body. So I'm very specific about each food that I put in there and why. And although initially it may sound restrictive, the only thing that I'm actually opposed to is vegetable oils. And I'm not even opposed to bread because I have fermented bread in there from sourdough because it's easy to digest. as even with oatmeal, which can be very difficult for people to digest, probably or mostly in large quantities. But when you ferment it, when you soak it overnight with some yogurt or some apple cider vinegar, it becomes very easy to digest. So some foods I don't necessarily restrict. I just talk about how you prepare them can determine how well they digest. So it's kind of a shotgun approach to what I do and why I do it.
I love it. It's breaking down everything inside the vertical diet. And one thing I want to kind of highlight is from listening, it's almost like you're taking a step back so you can take people 100 steps forward, right? A lot of people are so focused on performance or aesthetics that it's all about calories and macros, yet their body wreaks havoc in a health perspective, so they can't actually sustain those results. Which makes me want to ask too is, a lot of people will look at it and, like you said, like it might seem restrictive, but do you ever find that because you're fixing all these health parameters, people actually have less cravings and they can stay more consistent because their new norm is at such a healthier level, if that makes sense?
Well, you hit on two huge things. One, I step back, I get an unhealthy athlete. When Hafthor came to me, he was 420 pounds and he had metabolic syndrome. He had fatty liver, he had high blood sugars, he had low vitamin D, he wasn't sleeping well. He said he was gaining more fat and not getting any stronger. So I had to drop him back down to 390 pounds, do the blood test, remedy his vitamin D deficiency, get a CPAP, take out a lot of the foods that I thought were causing inflammation, the processed vegetable oils and the breads, pizza, pasta, pancakes. And then when I saw that his HA1C came down and he became more tolerant to sugars or to carbohydrates or to food in general, we started implementing the vertical diet to put weight back on him. And we got him back up to 440 pounds, and his blood sugars are not elevated. His blood pressure is not too high. He's gained a lot of muscle and a lot of strength. If you just look at him from pictures from 2.5 years ago as compared to now, it's phenomenal, the difference that's been made. So yes, we got him healthy. We backed off. When I get women who have been competing, a lot of times you'll see these women win nationals and get their pro card, and they might do 1, maybe 2 pro shows, and then you don't hear from them. They've burned out. They've completely wrecked their metabolisms. And so when I get a hold of them, I have to back way up. I have to eliminate some of the foods that are causing problems. I have to incorporate a lot of the foods that they've historically been avoiding, all the ones I mentioned, the fruit and the dairy and the iodine and the sodium and the red meat. And that's as much mental as anything else, just getting them to overcome that hurdle, that barrier, the stigma associated with those foods. So I get them healthy, and then next thing you know, they can have they're able to train and compete without creating those problems for themselves. It's more sustainable. So the second thing you said was about cravings. There's 2 reasons I think, and I'm the first one to say that all diets work when they're strictly adhered to, and that compliance is the science. And if you'll stay on a diet, and I talked about this in my obesity rant, even the McDonald's diet works. And the process of losing weight is probably 95% of the health benefits come from weight loss, not necessarily any specific diet. Now, of course, there's long-term ramifications there. If you create micronutrient deficiencies like the HCG diet, or even veganism, it may take months for your B12 deficiency to manifest. Or your iron deficiency before you start seeing the pratfalls of that, the loss of hair and the teeth rotting out of your mouth, etc., gum disease. So yes, I have to be careful when I make these broad statements, but all diets work when they're strictly adhered to, and losing weight is the primary driver of health outcomes. Even the McDonald's diet, he lost 30 or 40 pounds and walked 40 minutes a day just by keeping an 1,850 calorie maximum intake, and his blood sugars improved, his blood pressure improved, his cholesterol improved, all of his health markers improved from that experiment, as did the 7-Eleven diet, and I think even the ice cream diet resulted in some improvements in health markers. So now what do? You focus on compliance. We have, a 90+% recidivism rate. You help people with their diet and they lose some weight, and 90% of them gain it back. So you have to ask yourself, is this sustainable? And I try and pride myself on creating a diet that's simple, sensible, and sustainable. And is it something you can do for the long term? some of the problems with long term is if you create nutrient deficiencies, obviously that's going to hamper your ability to go long term. But I think there's two primary reasons that people come off of diets. And one is hunger, cravings, and two is loss of energy. When either of those two things happen, then people binge. And I try and remedy those two things with some of the things we talked about earlier. One is potassium and one is salt. People generally have sugar cravings when they're salt depleted. And if they don't get adequate carbohydrates and they lose the glycogen from their muscles, then they also lose 3 parts water. They also lose all the sodium associated with that. So as you're probably aware of, when you get somebody that's on a carnivore or keto diet, you have to put salt in them, a decent amount of salt in all their food to try and prevent some of those cravings and some of the energy loss, etc. Potassium is another huge one for cravings. People tend to get cravings when they get low in potassium. As I mentioned, potassium binds to glucose to store glycogen in the system. Those two things are huge for cravings. Also satiation, when they get hungry. And so I'll use steak instead of ground bison for people who are hungry a lot, because it's harder to chew and takes longer to eat. And I'll encourage them to take more, to chew longer and to take longer to eat their meals, because as you know, the leptin isn't released for probably 15, 20 minutes into the meal. And if I can get them to take longer to eat, then they'll be satiated by the time they're done. I also include, say, the potato, because that's a high satiety food. I use fruit instead of fruit juice for them. And those are all ways that I can manage appetite to some degree. Now, you're going to be a little hungry. That's part of losing weight. That's the body's compensatory mechanism to feeling starved. So the second piece I said, after being hungry or having cravings, is low energy. And low energy happens when you restrict salt, and when you restrict calcium, and when you restrict iodine, and when you restrict red meat. Iron and B12 are critical for energy. B12 is critical. It's the mitochondria of every cell in the body for generating energy. That's what it does. So all of those things are critical. So I make sure that as far as energy levels go, that I include all of those things in the diet. The fruit and the sodium and the iodine and the dairy, the calcium from dairy. And so what I find is that people who go on my diet start losing weight and they don't lose energy. And that to me is very encouraging. That's one of the questions I ask them at check-ins every week. How's your strength? How's your energy? How are your cravings? How's your regularity? I want to make sure that they're digesting their foods well and that they aren't losing too much energy. I have clients that are losing 5-6 pounds a week. As you know, some relatively obese beginners are apt to be able to do that. They can lose 30-40 pounds in 2 months, no problem. But the concern is do they get hungry and do they get tired? In which case they'll start seeking out high sodium and which generally high calorie foods to compensate for that hunger and exhaustion. So you hit the nail on the head on both those things. That's what I focus on and why I pick those foods.
I love it. I got to highlight it again too, because I think there's a lot of coaches that listen to this. So for good coaching, it's important to check in with your clients on the things you just mentioned. You're not just looking for a weigh-in, right? We're looking at sleep and stress and mood and hunger and cravings and all these different aspects that lead to better results. And then again, that just for people listening, I think a big piece of what you do so well is nutrient partitioning. You're getting the body to accept calories so much more efficiently that they are losing weight because they're using the calories the way they're meant to be used for performance, for energy, for hormonal health, so on and so forth. I do want to get to some listener questions because we had a bunch of people send some in, and I think there's some great topics that we kind of just brushed over. One specifically was, why was sodium demonized and why do people need to have it? As you are aware of, Mrs. Dash came out years and years ago and everybody decided to go on this like low salt phase. Why was that? And why is it so important for us to be consuming salt regularly?
Well, I think it's because it was associated with hypertension, that some of the research may have suggested that it'll raise your blood pressure. The problem with that is that there's only a small percentage of hypertensive people, sodium sensitive people, who respond that way. And like many things in the medical community, you prescribe, what's the term that's used? Treat the many to save the few is generally what happens. And so with salt, that's what happened. That people, some of the research had associated it with high blood pressure, but it was hypertensive individuals do respond poorly, and there is a small percentage of people. The Pure study that recently came out, which is one of the largest studies, I think it was over 100,000 people were specifically tested for sodium intake in something like 14 countries over a 10-year period, showed us that there was a healthy range, about 3 to 6 grams of sodium a day. Now, mind you, 6 grams of sodium is 15 grams of salt because it's a 40% sodium chloride solution, right? And so that range of healthy range of 3 to 6 grams a day, when you get below 3 grams a day, I don't care who you are, salt sensitive or otherwise, there's a dramatic spike in all-cause mortality. And so low sodium, say the DASH diet, 1.5 milligrams a day, or even the World Health Organization and the American Heart Association recommending 2.5 grams of sodium a day, is still below what is the healthy range. Fortunately, very few people are able to maintain that amount just because they'll feel terrible. Worldwide, I think the average is closer to 5 grams, just as a matter of people getting what they need. And that's what tends to happen. You tend to eat the salt that you need. Your body will find it one way or another and seek out the foods through giving you cravings, etc. It's why pregnant women eat pickles, and it's why athletes chase French fries. They think it's the carbs, but it's the salt that they're getting that they need. So that range, I think, is about 3 to 6 grams. Now, when you go over 6 grams, only the hypertensive people tend to respond poorly, and even in that instance, the vast majority of those are found to be low in potassium, magnesium, and calcium. And when you remedy for that, then the hypertensive, the elevated blood pressure dramatically improves. And even then, on the vast majority of people, the blood pressure movement was only 2 to 5 millimoles. So if you had a 120 blood pressure, it might go to 125. Very insignificant. The challenge is that now what problems have you caused as a result of restricting sodium, which is of little consequence to the vast majority of people. Now you create these dehydration deficiencies. You lose energy, stamina, endurance. It affects your digestion. It affects your immune system. It's affects so many things that it's just senseless to be restricting sodium. Your body can process 30 grams of salt a day, no problem. The kidneys easily, a healthy kidney system can easily process that. We have communities such as Japan who eats a lot of seafood. They're easily taking in 30 grams of salt a day. And they have some of the lowest, they have the cardiovascular problems and the highest life expectancy. So I think it's been a huge myth. Dr. D. Nicolantonio's book, The Salt Fix, addresses it very well. It's an excellent resource. There's a host of other people who have since come out in support. Dr. Sandra Godick from the Heat Institute is a PhD in thermoregulation and hydration. She's a big promoter of getting adequate salt in the body, particularly for athletes. They burn through 2.5 milligrams or 2.5 grams of sodium an hour. So now, in addition to what you need just to sustain, a healthy life, you need to get 2.5 grams an hour for every hour that you're training for hard training. This is one of the biggest things I did for Camille LeBlanc and Ben Smith, for Hafthor and Shaw when they were in Manila at the World's Strongest Man, for professional MMA fighters I work with. Hydration, and not just for competing, but for training. If I can get them to take half a teaspoon of pink salt on their tongue and wash it down with 10 ounces of water about 30 minutes before training, their time to exhaustion can increase by up to 20 minutes, and their stamina and endurance and their performance, their recovery, all dramatically improves. If you get a client that's lightheaded while they're training, that's a sodium deficiency. You get them to do the half teaspoon with water about 30 minutes before exercising, and that goes away immediately. Not within a week, within a day. And so that's one of the ways that I use sodium for performance in particular. And depending on your body size, your sweat rate, how hot it is outside, the workload that you do daily, if it's 2 a day, it's like with a lot of the CrossFitters, you may need more. And depending on how much water you drink. Drinking water is not the be-all, end-all for hydration. There is no water in the body per se. It's all fluid, and it contains sodium and potassium, magnesium, and calcium. So that fluid has to be have the right amounts of micronutrients and minerals and electrolytes in it. So drinking tons and tons of water can actually dehydrate you, can flush those those electrolytes out of the body, and you end up peeing clear, which is not a good thing. So we're looking for lemonade, not apple juice, and we certainly don't want it to be clear. So you have adequate electrolytes in the body. So it's kind of a shotgun approach to sodium, but it's one of the single most things that athletes have come back to me and said has dramatically improved their performance in the immediate sense. I'm talking within a few days, they go do a workout and they've got a 20-pound PR on their squats. And that's not exaggeration by any stretch of the imagination. I've got testimonials from people all over the world, and they reach out to me all the time telling me that has been the single most dramatic improvement in their energy levels and performance was salting their food to taste. If we want to talk about how much, that's what the professionals recommend. Salt your food to taste, meaning if you put too much on your food, your tongue will tell you. And if you don't put any on your food, you're not going to realize the benefit. Food's the best way to get salt. You generally can't get enough salt in a drink. It wouldn't be palatable. It would taste horrendous. That's why Gatorade is not terribly effective with the salt that they put in their drinks, or most others for that matter, because it wouldn't taste good. If you put half a teaspoon of salt into a glass of water, it's going to taste horrendous. Get your salt with your food, particularly because carbohydrates is the shuttle that takes the sodium throughout the body. And that's the best way to get adequate salt, and then utilize that intra-workout method that I talked about with the half teaspoon of salt prior to training as a sport-specific dose.
That's amazing. And I think it's hilarious because it's not everybody's searching for a marketed supplement, and it's like, no, just some pink salt and you're good, and it's going to help you that much. And I think this next question from a listener kind of relates, because I believe you have a post-workout recipe or remedy for people that relates to both of these. But they wanted to know your stance on caffeine.
Yeah, I think caffeine can be a performance enhancer when used strategically. Your body can absorb about 1 gram of glucose a minute. If you add a second sugar source, then it can absorb 2 grams a minute. That's why I recommend taking in both fructose and dextrose. The Heat Institute, Dr. Godek, has a product called Levelin, and she recommends dextrose and maltodextrin, I think, are the two that she puts in her product. And she puts a significant amount of sodium in her product. So now you're getting 2 grams a minute because you're using 2 carbohydrate sources for absorption. Add salt to that blend, you get 3 grams a minute. Your body will absorb 3 grams of glucose a minute. Add caffeine to that equation, you can get as high as 4 grams a minute. So when George Lockhart, who trains Conor McGregor and John Jones and a host of other UFC athletes, he does their water cut for them. After they get done weighing in, they step off the scale. He hands them a drink, and in that drink is 2 sources of carbohydrates, some sodium and some caffeine. And he throws some digestive enzymes in there and maybe a little EAA's essential amino acids, just because they're so dehydrated. I don't think that for the average individual that the amino acids are necessary during the workout. If you got a meal 2 hours prior and you're not at a calorie deficit and you're getting a meal an hour after, then they're relatively worthless. But having said that, that's the drink he gives them, and they absorb it at about 4 grams a minute. And now if it's, say, 100 grams of carbs, which that is probably a little high, it's going to take you 20 minutes to absorb all of those. So he has them drink it slowly. He has them take 10, 15 minutes to drink that drink. He watches them, make sure they don't, guzzle it down, which could create some digestion problems. And he has them take a walk. So they drink that drink, and then they take a 10-minute walk. You've heard me talk about the 10-minute walks after meals and how effective that is for increasing nutrient partitioning and insulin sensitivity and improving digestion. So he's pretty strategic about the way he takes it up. So in my vertical diet, I did talk about a post-workout drink that included 2 carbohydrate sources and some sodium and some caffeine potentially, particularly if you train twice a day. If you don't train twice a day, taking that drink after your morning workout is probably not terribly important. Getting the sodium in prior, I think, would be of a bigger benefit. And I've come to the conclusion, I think, after having experimented with myself, and I think the president of the International Sports Science Association talks about, as well as John Meadows, talks about a para-workout, an intra-workout, drinking it, sipping it throughout training. So I'll take the salt before the workout, and then 10, 15 minutes into my training session, I'll start sipping on that concoction, my 2 carbs, salt, and caffeine, throughout the workout, and then finish it when I'm done. To me, that's probably the optimal way to utilize that drink. Unfortunately, I do a 2-hour seminar, and 90% of the questions are about that drink. And they seem to have missed the sleep portion and the nutrition portion and everything else. And so that's why I try and say, mention in these interviews that drink isn't a panacea. It's for a particular purpose. The sodium's the primary driver of I think, the workout energy. And the carbohydrates can be obtained by the meals you get post-workout over the next 24 hours until you exercise again, unless you're a highly competitive athlete training twice a day like CrossFit or MMA, in which case that second workout could benefit significantly from the hydration that you get from the first right after the first workout. That creates a huge result.
You already alluded to this a little bit, but the next question mentioned the walk. So let's just get right into that. You recommend many people to take 3 10-minute walks per day. What started this and why 3 10-minute walks?
I recommend everyone do it, whether you're an athlete, whether you're just a truck driver. I just had a truck driver at my seminar over the weekend. I had a vert cert here in Vegas, and he said, "I'm a truck driver. What can I do?" And I said, "Well, every time you stop, you take a 10-minute walk. Some way to get the blood flowing." I'm not certain where it came from. It was just some of the research. I was having problems with elevated HA1C. I was vitamin D deficient. I was training and then just sitting around a lot. I implemented in 2010, when I was training with Mark Bell for powerlifting competition, I noticed the more I laid around, the longer my DOMS lasted, my delayed onset muscle soreness, and the longer it would take me to recover. And the more I moved around, the faster I would recover. It's kind of a no-brainer, but in the powerlifting industry and when you're trying to gain weight, the mantra is, don't run if you can walk, don't stand if you can sit, and don't stay awake if you can sleep. And then just eat anything and everything that you can all day long, right? That was how we tried to gain weight. That was my dirty bulk. But I found that when I was squatting with Mark and we were, working really hard and very heavy, that if I just laid around a lot, that I was sore longer. So I got a recumbent bike and I put it in my hotel room I was staying at in Sacramento when I was training with Mark for those months that I trained with him. And the day after leg day, I would sit on that recumbent bike and I would do a 10-minute HIIT session, 30 seconds sprints with a 30-second rest. And I would do that 10 times. It only take me 10 minutes. There's a little bit of tension. It was all concentric loading, so I wasn't creating any muscle damage, as you might if you put a light squat in there with the eccentric movement. And I would do that 3 times a day. I'd do that when I got up in the morning. I would do that in the afternoon and in the evening, whenever. It didn't seem to matter. And my recovery rate was probably cut in half. I felt incredibly better. I was able to recover faster. My training sessions much improved. And then after, looking at some of the research on it, I noticed there had been some benefit. There were some science studies that I put in my vertical diet. And just to mention it while I'm talking about it, the vertical diet has over 100 references to videos, articles, and scientific studies supporting every aspect of what I propose in the diet. And so people can get more information. It's intended to be pretty easy to read and to follow and to implement, but then have those additional resources if people need them, so they can, be confident that they're on the right track. They're pursuing a good avenue. So the literature suggests that when you walk post-meal, you improve blood sugars. The scientific research suggests that it lowers HA1C, and it decreases the spike of insulin and the duration of insulin that's in the bloodstream. And the glucose is absorbed quicker. Part of it may be the mTOR pathway, where the muscles can absorb glucose in the absence of insulin. Some of that is being shuttled in just from your work, just from walking. It's a brisk walk. I do like to swing my arms and get an elevated heart rate. And the studies suggest that you can take 10,000 steps a day. But if you take 4,000 steps doing these brisk 3 10-minute walks, you have better improvement in body composition, VO2 max, and blood sugars because of the intensity. And again, it's not a sprint, but you do get your heart rate elevated, and you do it 3 times a day as opposed to 1. 3 10-minute walks is better than 1 30-minute walk at the end of the day. It seems that you can't undo sitting all day with one exercise program at the end of the day. Sitting's the new smoking, and the damage exceeds the workout that you do in the evening. So my recommendation is you walk during the day or even standing up at your desk for 10 minutes out of every hour if you sit during work. I think that the research that I put in the diet suggests that that's equivalent to running 17 marathons a year, because standing burns more calories than sitting. If you want to look at the comparative calorie consumption benefit specifically, certainly not the VO2 benefit. But that's kind of where the 10-minute walks came in. And I use them for Stephanie Sanza is Steph Fitmum from Australia, real popular fitness personality on social media. She used to get up at 4 a.m., do her 40-minute fasted cardio, and do another 40-minute session in the evening. And she used to eat egg whites and broccoli, and she had IBS, like a lot of my female. She also had, I didn't lose you there, did I?
It just cut out for a sec, but you're good.
Okay. Well, Stephanie Sanza reached out to me nearly a year ago now, and she had all the problems that all the competitive women have had that have reached out to me over the years. She had digestion problems, irritable bowel syndrome. She was having a really hard time maintaining her condition and her weight. She would get bloated and water retention, and she was tired and what have you. And she was on the typical diet. And so I convinced her to eat the red meat and to eat the dairy daily and to eat the fruit and to take the sodium and to do all those things and to quit with the egg whites and stop with the broccoli and to stop with the 40-minute cardio sessions. She now, all these many months later, is in the best shape of her life, eats more calories, eats more carbs, never does more than the 10-minute walks. She hasn't done a 40-minute cardio session in 9 months. And she looks better than ever. She looks phenomenal. And I replace that calorie consuming. I think that maintaining a calorie deficit is twofold. As you know, I restrict some calories sometimes, but I also increase workload, which I think is a better way to go. Because I think there's a floor to which you can't cut calories anymore without, I think, harming an athlete's system. So she'll do the 3 10-minute walks, and then if she needs to burn more calories, I'll just have her do 2 hypertrophy sessions. So instead of doing an hour and a half workout in the evening, she'll come in the morning and do 40 minutes, and she'll come in the evening and do 30 minutes. And it's just hypertrophy training. She's just doing volume, sets and reps. So that's a specific example of how I use that use the 10-minute walks for people that are dieting. Hawthorne and Shaw, they use the 10-minute walks to improve their metabolism, to increase, to benefit insulin sensitivity, to nutrient absorption, like you said, the partitioning, and to make them hungry. They just utilize their food better and faster, and they're hungry sooner, and they can eat another meal because consuming enough calories is of primary importance to those guys. And anything I can do to maximize that, which we talked about earlier, and the 10-minute walks also dramatically benefit that. And it sounds contrary to everything I did in the 90s when I was trying to gain weight. I wouldn't move a finger if I thought it would burn a calorie that wouldn't help me grow. These guys do 10-minute walks after every meal because it's hugely beneficial for gaining size and strength by improving that nutrient partitioning and insulin sensitivity. So Hawthorne still does them. He's been doing them for 2 years. He has a bike in his garage if it's too cold in Iceland. Shaw will use a bike if he's too heavy for his feet sometimes. All that pressure on his feet, being that weight. So everybody does them. I still do them. If I'm at the airport traveling, I'm picking up my pace and swinging my arms and busting ass through the airport to get my 10 minutes in. If I'm at a hotel, I'll get up in the morning and eat, and then I'll walk circles around the hotel. If I go to a restaurant, I'll walk out of the restaurant and I'll just walk down the street for 5 minutes, turn around and walk back before I get in my car to drive home. So I incorporate them into my daily routine. I'll put my daughter's breakfast on the table in the morning. I'll go take a 10-minute walk, and when I come back, I'll get her ready for school. So that is part of the sustainable portion of the diet program. Everything I implement, I try and make sure it's something you can do as part of a lifestyle. A 40-minute walk on a treadmill is not anything anybody's going to do long term. There's not a chance. That's the first thing you're going to cut off your list when you get busy. And plus that, it's just mind-numbingly boring. So the 10-minute walks revive you. They're easy to do. You can do them every day forever, and you should. The Amish walk 20,000 steps a day. They eat ham and bacon and lard and butter and all kinds of stuff every single day. They have 3% obesity and nearly half the cancers that we have. They just move more often. So it's kind of the roundabout on 10-minute walks.
I love it. That's so huge and so simple. And the thing that keeps coming up in my mind is I read this post the other day, and it was like, your diet is not just what you eat. It's what you watch, who you hang out with, what you move, how you move, all these different things. And that's, to me, what the vertical diet is. It's so cool because there's so many non-food related things that you implement into it to make sure people are improving their health. So it's so big. The next question is, and I actually haven't heard you talk about this, so I'm interested about this. They were interested in your perspective on vertical diet plus time restricted eating or intermittent fasting and how you feel about that.
Yeah, I never want to shit on anybody's diet because what works for you is most important. If keto works for you, do keto. If carnivore works for you, do carnivore. I'm cautionary to say that there are some things you should pay attention to so that you don't end up with deficiencies, or that it's easier to follow. And that's why I mentioned with the salt, with the keto diet. I also like to make sure that people get enough potassium in, and that's something that you have to pay attention to on a carnivore diet. Intermittent fasting is another example of that. Intermittent fasting can work if it creates a calorie deficit. And for some people that overeat, restricting the window can help them create a calorie deficit. And far be it from me to tell somebody that's not a good plan if it works for them. If they can lose weight on that program, what's the best diet? The one you'll follow. And I start there, and I create that calorie equation for them. And then I try and settle them into something that works for them. And if intermittent fasting works, I'm all for suggesting it. Now, to take that a step further, if you think there's some sort of magical benefit to intermittent fasting, some sort of hormonal benefit, it doesn't exist. And actually, a little to the contrary. Schoenfeld and Aragon just came out with another study that looked at intermittent fasting with respect to muscle retention, and found that because of that extended fasting period, you were at risk of losing more muscle tissue utilizing intermittent fasting, which is a concern because it compromises your metabolism, your basal metabolic rate, right? Your number of calories that you burn in a day. So that's one of the things that we all worry about when people go on diets, is metabolic adaptation. How much muscle do you lose? Because that's the engine that burns the fuel. And we don't want to take off too much muscle because then you end up lighter, but you have to eat fewer calories to maintain that mass because you don't have that extra muscle tissue burning the extra calories. So that's, the science suggests that fast can be detrimental. And I'm not saying you're going to lose 5 pounds of muscle overnight, but over a 3 to 6 month or a year-long period, compared to eating 4 meals a day, about every 4 hours, it isn't any better for weight loss than when you compare for calories. And it can be detrimental in terms of muscle loss compared to the amount of fat loss. So that's the only cautionary note I might mention. Of course, resistance training helps. Getting an adequate and optimal amount of protein could certainly offset some of that loss. But it does seem that apples to apples, intermittent fasting is not optimal, particularly for athletes. I never encourage competitive athletes to do that. I know there's been a lot of talk about how it increases growth hormone and all this other stuff. And so athletes are like, ooh, growth hormone, which doesn't even contribute to muscle, to hypertrophy anyhow. So it's kind of a false flag. But I encourage athletes to eat about every 4 hours while they're awake, because as you know, there's no mechanism in the body to store protein. And when your body reaches for amino acids to do a repair, and it could be muscle tissue, it could be anything. And if it's not there, it has to wait. And that's not optimal. So that's what I recommend with specifically to intermittent fasting. That's kind of the whole view.
I think that's a perfect answer. And what I always kind of preach on my podcast and with my client stuff is it's an adherence tool. So if you're an average Joe looking to lose weight and it helps you, like you said, stick to the diet plan, by all means go for it. But it's not a magic pill. It's not something that's going to immediately lead to a result. And I believe a lot of studies have come out on it showing any hormonal or health benefits to be when you're fasting once every 3 months for 36 plus hours in a straight fast, not training, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I was going to say about every 6 weeks, if you do a 24-hour would be fine. And like you went up to 36. I think once you get over about 24, there may be some downsides, but it should be periodically.
Yeah.
So you get a 12-hour fast every night if you eat 4 meals a day, 8, noon, 4, and 8. And 12 hours is pretty reasonable. That can definitely help offset some metabolic syndrome. People who eat every 2 hours, we might as well jump on this real quick. That can be a problem. That can create insulin resistance. It also doesn't benefit from the refractory period for muscle protein synthesis. When you eat a meal, your muscle protein synthesis spikes and then slowly comes back down to normal. Well, that process takes about 3 to 5 hours. And if you eat a meal 2 hours later, you don't spike muscle protein synthesis again. And so you're not getting the extra benefit of the muscle protein synthesis, and you may be impairing absorption of insulin sensitivity. Having said that, for big athletes, getting calories in is of primary importance. So you have to weigh these things against the individual's needs.
I love it. That's 100% in line with what we always preach here. And I think just from a digestive and an insulin benefit alone, the 3 to 4 meal range and that 12-hour period at night is so helpful for people to actually see beneficial results. This last question that we have for you today is more of a personality question. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this one. They asked, in regards to health and fitness, what advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
Oh, wow. If I knew then what I know now, I'm probably doing most of it with my athletes. I certainly would have taken in more salt. I would have avoided bread more because it just wreaks havoc on my stomach. Vegetable oils is another thing I didn't discover until very late in the game. Those processed vegetable oils, particularly for me, I'm allergic to them, so they cause gastric distress in a very bad way. And that was before I knew about the omega-6s and the cellular structure that's created by the omega-6s as opposed to the efficiency and the rigidity of the saturated fats in the cells. And then, of course, the oxidation of those when the fat burns, when your body utilizes that energy source and creates free radicals in the system, it's just a lot less efficient fuel for your body to use. And that's, again, beyond the fact that the vast majority of those vegetable oils are already rancid when you get them, exposed to light and heat, and that includes 70+% of omega-3 supplements are rancid, exposed to light and heat. So I definitely would have avoided vegetable oils. I would have avoided bread more, for certain, and had a better variety. I would have salted more. I would have been more focused on potassium. Probably everything that we talked about that makes up the foundation, because I was certainly stacking a 3-bedroom house on a 2-bedroom foundation. And I was just teetering underneath it. And I probably pushed myself as far as I could. And I was fortunate to get out without any significant injuries. But I had, from my blood tests, I could see when I was unhealthy. And, but when you're competing, as I said in my rant, if you want to be healthy, don't compete. You tend to look past those things. And I understand when I work with a Hafthor, a Shaw, or a Dan Green, or even a Camille LeBlanc, that competing isn't healthy. And so I have to be very, very diligent behind the scenes to do everything I can to remedy that, to mitigate the damage that they're doing to their body, because there's no way you can compete at that level without doing damage. And so I'm underneath them trying to shore all of that up by looking at their diet, all the specific aspects of their diet and their recovery, and the CPAPs for sleeping and the vitamin D supplementation and whatever else, and getting the blood tests so I can see, if they're having any metabolic syndrome or metabolic adaptation issues. So probably just about everything that's in the vertical diet is all the things that I wish I was doing 12 years ago. Many of them I incorporated slowly over the years as I learned about them. And now I think I've got, a pretty good, compilation of things that have benefited me and my athletes. So, I have to say, I really appreciate you contacting me and interviewing me about the vertical diet, because you provide diets and training for athletes as well. And your system is excellent, and athletes are in good hands with you. There's 3 things I think that are most important, and it's not the vertical diet or anybody else's diet. There's 3 things that I've found that are the most important things, and meta-analysis studies of all the literature regarding health outcomes have proven that these are the top 3 things. And these are all 3 things that you provide. The first most important thing is meal prep. Whether you prep or you buy prep meals from a company, whatever, meal prep. That seems to be the most important thing, is having what you need when you need it, and it's the right food. And so I try and get all of my athletes to focus on preparing their meals, the right meals, and having them available. That's why I talk about carrying around the thermos full of a hot meal that'll stay hot for 10 hours, or 2 or 3 or 6 of them. If you're flying, Hawthorne's flying out tomorrow from Vegas, and he's got 5 thermos that he'll be pouring meals into the same way I travel. So every 3 hours, he can eat a nice hot monster mash on his way home to Iceland. So if you open your fridge and it's full of Tupperware, you're probably on point. And if you aren't, and you're foraging for food at Subway or at the airport, then chances are your performance is going to suffer. And whether that's just a weight loss goal or as an athlete, a lot of these guys reach out to me, Nick Best, Brian Oberst, a whole bunch of reach out to me just because they saw Thor and Shaw, when they traveled, had all their meals with them and everything that they needed. Their rice cooker or their Foreman grill or their monster mashes. They stayed in a hotel with a microwave and a fridge. Everywhere they went, they knew that that was the single most important thing. They should skip a workout rather than skip a meal. They know that. So I don't mean to go on and on, but meal prep is the number one thing for outcomes. Number 2 is a daily checklist. And that's all these things that, like the 10-minute walks, the taking the vitamin D, wearing your CPAP, getting adequate sleep. I have a daily checklist of things that I require all of my clients to check out daily so I can supervise that and see if they're doing all the compliance issues. And number 3 is your coach, checking in with your coach on at least a weekly basis. What's the least effective method for weight loss? Clinicians, dietitians, doctors. That turned out in the meta-analysis to be the least effective method. So your interaction with your clients, your ability to get them to comply with the daily to-do list and make sure that they're on point with their meals is, I think, the 3 biggest keys to success. And so I wanted to share that and appreciate you for helping so many people, reach their goals, short-term and long-term.
Thank you, man. I mean, just coming from you alone, I got to admit, man, it means a lot, seriously, because I look up to you as a coach as well. And on that note, I think we can end it. I think that was so much value that you just provided the listeners. I love that we went so in depth in every aspect of the vertical diet, but you also shared testimonials and case studies and different things that you're doing with your clients that I think people can really apply. So I really appreciate the way you went about it. Before we do sign off, is there anything you can let the listeners know? I mean, as far as where they can find you, your website, where they can get the book, all of that stuff, so I can link it in the show notes?
Yeah, stanefferding.com is my website, stanefferding.com. And I do have the vertical diet there as a digital download that people can utilize for their program, or they could come. You have a very similar program. They come to you. And I do have the meal prep company, and that's at stanefferding.com. There's a link there if they want to buy meals. I partnered with one of the largest meal prep companies in the country. They serve 4 million meals a year, and they'll ship them right to your house. And my signature item, of course, is the Monster Mash, and we now have the world's strongest meal. It's an 1,100 calorie Monster Mash Deluxe with spinach and peppers and burger and rice made with bone broth. It's absolutely delicious, and we have free shipping. And that's kind of one of the ways that I stay on point is I always have my meals ready. And if you prep your own meals or you buy mine, either way, you need to make sure and do meal prep. And that's the single most important thing to success is that you're eating what you need when you need it.
Stan, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me, Biggs.
All right, guys, that is a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the show today. A couple quick announcements before I let you go. First and foremost, I just want to encourage you to check out the products I have in the description. First one is the Nutrition Hierarchy. This is a very cheap guide to literally mastering your diet. That's why it's called the All-Inclusive Guide to Mastering Your Diet. It's going to teach you exactly what and how to manage your calories, your macros, your meal timing, your supplements, your micronutrients, literally everything you need to know about dieting and nutrition and how to change your body composition through nutrition is included in this book. Not just to get your results, but to actually teach you how to get those results along the way. The next thing is going to be Functional Muscle, which is my first and right now my biggest product out there. This is the program that is based on years and years and years of functional training with tons of clients. So whether your goal is strength, fat loss, or muscle gain, you should be strength training towards these goals while prioritizing functional movement patterns to make sure that you are avoiding any injuries along the way. That's exactly what this program does, and it's great because it guides you through the process, it changes throughout the process, and it gives you demonstrations and explanations about everything you're doing so you never get confused and you always have a solution. You also get access into the Boom Boom Performance Podcast Forum, and that is the only way into the forum, and that's where you can ask me literally anything about anything, and I will help guide you through the process. Last thing I want to mention, guys, is if you could leave me a 5-star rating and review, that would be fantastic because it literally is one of the biggest and best ways for me to grow in the iTunes charts. Oh yeah, and real quick, if you're not subscribed, hit the damn subscribe button because I constantly bust out content for you guys and I spend a lot of time and effort making sure that you guys can get better results for free by simply listening to this podcast. All right, guys, I'll catch you next time.